My brother stole my inheritance, my parents helped him do it, and for 10 years they told me I was crazy for suspecting anything. But the night my father died, I found a hidden envelope in his garage that destroyed my entire family. I didn't grow up in one of those obviously abusive families where everybody screams and throws plates at each other. From the outside, we looked normal. Upper middle class family in suburban Ohio. Big Christmas dinners, matching pajamas and Facebook photos. My mom volunteered at church. My dad coached Little League for years. My older brother Ryan was the golden child. And me? I was the difficult one. That label followed me my entire life. If Ryan broke something, I probably distracted him. If Ryan failed a class, I should have helped him study. If Ryan got arrested at 17 for drunk driving, my parents somehow turned it into a lecture about how I embarrassed the family by telling my aunt what happened. I'm not exaggerating. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table while my dad pointed at me like I was the criminal. You need to stop talking about family business outside this house, Daniel. I was 16. Ryan had wrapped his Mustang around a mailbox while drunk out of his mind, and somehow I was the problem. That was basically my childhood in one sentence. Ryan was charisma. Ryan was football captain. Ryan was the guy everybody loved at parties. He could smile after punching you in the face and somehow make you apologize to him. Meanwhile, I was skinny, awkward, obsessed with computers, and spent most of high school trying not to attract attention. My parents acted like Ryan was destined for greatness, while I was some weird side project they had to manage carefully. My mom used to say things like, "Daniel's smart, but Ryan has people skills." Or my favorite, "You know your brother doesn't mean the things he says, you're just too sensitive." Ryan once locked me outside during a snowstorm because I needed thicker skin. I was 12. But the thing that really changed everything happened when I was 19. My grandfather died. Now my grandfather, my dad's father, was the only person in the family who ever treated me like I mattered. He taught me woodworking, took me fishing, helped pay for my first laptop. He actually listened when I talked. A month before he died, he called me privately into his room at the hospice center. I remember the smell of antiseptic and old coffee. The TV was playing some baseball game quietly in the background. He looked terrible, skin gray, hands shaking, but his voice was clear. "Danny," he said, "don't let your father screw you." I laughed because I genuinely thought he was joking. Then he grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. "I'm serious." That was the first time in my life I ever felt actual fear around family. He looked toward the door before speaking again. "I left something for you. Your father knows." "What are you talking about?" But he just shook his head slowly. "Be smarter than all of them." Then he closed his eyes. He died 2 days later. At the funeral, my dad cried harder than anybody there. Ryan gave this dramatic speech about family legacy, while half the room applauded him like he was running for president. 3 weeks later, my dad gathered us in the living room. "No inheritance," he announced. "Your grandfather died with more debt than we realized." That confused me immediately. My grandfather owned his house outright. He had military pension income. He barely spent money. But my mom immediately jumped in. "It's very tragic. We may even need to sell the lake cabin." Ryan acted devastated for maybe 30 seconds before asking if anybody wanted beer. And that was it. No reading of the will, no lawyer meeting, nothing. At 19, I didn't know enough to question it properly. I was in community college, working part-time at Best Buy, barely surviving financially. My parents had spent years making me feel stupid and paranoid, so eventually I convinced myself I misunderstood what Grandpa meant. Life moved on. Ryan got into real estate because, according to my father, people naturally trust him, which was insane because Ryan was a pathological liar. Meanwhile, I transferred universities, got a degree in software engineering, and moved to Chicago the second I could afford it. For the first time in my life, I was away from them. And honestly, I started healing. I met my girlfriend Emily at 26. She was a nurse, sarcastic as hell, and the first person who ever looked at my family stories and said, "Your parents are emotionally abusive." I literally defended them. "No, they're just old school." She stared at me over dinner. "Daniel, your brother stole your car in college and your mother made you apologize because he was under stress." When someone from outside your family hears your stories, suddenly they sound insane. That's what Emily did for me. She made me realize my entire childhood wasn't normal. Still, I kept limited contact with my family because part of me desperately wanted their approval. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was 31. My father had a stroke. Not fatal, but serious enough that I had to fly back to Ohio. The second I walked into the hospital room, Ryan was already there pretending to be son of the year, talking loudly to nurses, telling relatives he'd handled everything, acting exhausted for attention. My mother hugged him first. Not me. Him. I hadn't seen these people in almost 2 years, and somehow we were instantly back in the same toxic roles. Dad recovered enough to return home after 2 weeks. During that time, I stayed at my parents' house because hotels were expensive and my mom insisted. Huge mistake. Being back in that house felt like traveling backward in time psychologically. Every conversation became criticism. You've gained weight. You still renting? When are you having kids? You know Emily's biological clock is ticking. Ryan made it worse. One night while drinking bourbon in the garage, he suddenly smirked and asked, "You ever wonder why Grandpa liked you more?" I looked up from my phone. What? He knew you'd need the help. Then he laughed. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. You remember him saying he left something for you? Ryan asked casually. My heart stopped. I never told Ryan about that conversation. Ever. I stared at him. How do you know about that? Ryan took another sip. Because Dad told me. The garage suddenly felt very small. What exactly did Dad say? Ryan leaned back in the chair with this lazy grin I hated since childhood. That Grandpa wanted to leave you part of the inheritance. Dad convinced him not to. I genuinely thought I misheard him. What? Ryan shrugged. You were a kid. Dad thought you'd waste it. I couldn't breathe for a second. Dad said there wasn't any inheritance. Ryan laughed. Oh, there definitely was. I just stared at him. Then he said the sentence that detonated my entire life. You really think Dad bought me that real estate office himself? Silence. Complete silence. My ears were ringing. Ryan smiled like he was enjoying every second of it. You should see your face right now. I stood up so fast the chair scraped across concrete. How much? Ryan smirked. Enough. I walked into the house shaking with rage. My father was asleep in the recliner watching TV. My mother was folding laundry nearby. I didn't even care anymore. You lied to me, I said. My mother immediately stiffened. What are you talking about? Grandpa had money. Dad slowly opened his eyes. Nobody spoke. That silence told me everything. You stole my inheritance? Dad sighed like I was inconveniencing him. For God's sake, Daniel! How much? It wasn't your money. I'll never forget hearing that. Not your money. Like I was some stranger asking for charity instead of his son. My father sat up slowly. Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind near the end. That's bullshit. Dad's face hardened instantly. You watch your mouth. No, you watch your mouth. Grandpa told me himself he left something for me. My mother jumped in immediately. Your father made the best decision for this family. For Ryan, you mean? Dad slammed his hand against the recliner. Because Ryan actually had ambition. That hit harder than I expected. Even at 31 years old, part of me still wanted him to say he loved me equally. Instead, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You would have blown that money on computers and nonsense." I actually laughed because it sounded unreal. Ryan walked in behind me smiling. Here we go, he muttered. Then Dad said the sentence that permanently destroyed our relationship. Everything we did for Ryan paid off. Look at him now. Successful. Respected. Meanwhile, you disappeared to Chicago and barely call your own mother. I remember Emily once telling me toxic families always rewrite reality to protect the golden child. That night, I saw it clearly for the first time. Ryan had DUIs, debt, affairs, lawsuits. But in my parents' minds, he was success because he reflected the image they wanted. And me? I threatened the fantasy. I left the house that night and drove around for almost 3 hours, shaking with anger. Emily answered on the second ring. What happened? I pulled into a Walmart parking lot and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. They stole from me. There was silence. Then, quietly. How much? I don't know. Daniel. My entire life, they made me feel crazy. That was the moment something inside me changed permanently, not emotionally, strategically, because for the first time, I stopped wanting their love. And once you stop needing toxic people emotionally, they become predictable. The next morning, I apologized. That surprised all of them. Dad smirked like he'd won. Mom cried dramatically. Ryan looked disappointed because he wanted more conflict. I told them I overreacted and just wanted peace. Inside, I was already planning revenge. The first thing I did when I got back to Chicago was hire a lawyer. Not some dramatic TV-style shark attorney, just a quiet probate lawyer named Richard Levin, who looked permanently exhausted and drank black coffee like it was medication. I told him everything, grandfather's comments, the missing inheritance, Ryan's drunken confession. Richard listened without interrupting once. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Did you ever actually see the will? No. He slowly removed his glasses. That's unusual. Turns out, in Ohio, beneficiaries are generally notified during probate proceedings. Assets don't just magically disappear because one family member says so. And according to Richard, my grandfather's estate should have gone through probate because of the value of his assets. Unless. There are ways families hide estate transfers, Richard explained carefully, especially if assets are moved before death. That made my skin crawl. So, what do we do? Richard leaned back. We start digging. For the next 6 weeks, my entire life became research. Property records, business filings, tax documents, old bank transfers. And little by little, a disgusting picture started forming. 3 months before my grandfather died, ownership of the lake cabin transferred to my father for $1. $1. The house? Also transferred. Large withdrawals from Grandpa's accounts? All signed during the final weeks of hospice care. Then Richard found something worse. Ryan's real estate company had been launched with a family investment trust worth nearly $430,000. Dated 2 months after Grandpa died. I remember staring at the paperwork in Richard's office while my hands went numb. $430,000. My father hadn't just stolen from me. He stole my future. Student loans, years struggling financially. Emily postponing med school because we couldn't afford instability. Every humiliating paycheck-to-paycheck moment while Ryan played rich businessman using stolen money. And the entire family lied about it for over a decade. You have a potential case, Richard said carefully, but proving coercion after this many years won't be easy. I asked the obvious question. What about criminal charges? Richard sighed immediately. That's harder. Of course it was. People like my father survive because they operate in gray areas, technicalities, family trust, emotional manipulation. But then, something unexpected happened. Emily got involved. Now, Emily hated my family long before I finally admitted they were toxic. But once she saw the actual documents, she became terrifyingly calm. That scared me more than anger. One night, she spread copies of financial records across our kitchen table and said, "Your brother's company is drowning." I blinked. What? She pointed at public filings on her laptop. Ryan's business looked successful online. Luxury photos, networking events, expensive suits. But financially? Disaster. Massive loans, delayed tax payments, pending lawsuits from contractors. He's leveraged to the ceiling, Emily said. And suddenly I understood something crucial. Ryan wasn't confident. He was desperate. That's why he bragged in the garage. That's why he baited me. Deep down, he wanted validation. He wanted me to know he won. Because people who are truly secure don't need audiences. So instead of immediately suing them, I waited. And that was the best decision I ever made. Over the next few months, I rebuilt contact with my family carefully. Phone calls, birthday texts, holiday visits. I played the role perfectly. The forgiving son. My mother ate it up immediately. Oh, it's so wonderful having my boys close again. Meanwhile, Ryan kept making mistakes because narcissists mistake silence for weakness. One night during Thanksgiving, he got drunk and started bragging in front of cousins about building his empire from nothing. I smiled and raised my beer. Dad really believed in you. Ryan smirked proudly. He knew who could actually succeed. Dad nearly smiled. And that's when I knew something important. Neither of them felt guilt. Not even a little. That made what came next much easier. See, while rebuilding trust with my family, I also started quietly investigating Ryan's business. And holy hell, the guy wasn't just unethical, he was committing actual fraud. Fake renovation invoices, undisclosed kickbacks, properties sold between shell LLCs to inflate market value. At first I thought maybe I was misreading things. Then Emily's cousin, who worked in commercial banking, looked over some public filings and literally laughed. This guy's either a complete idiot, or he thinks nobody's watching. Ryan had spent years acting untouchable because our parents protected him from consequences. But the real world doesn't care who mommy loves most. Now here's the thing. I could have anonymously reported him immediately, but I didn't. Because I wanted them all exposed together, not separately. And then fate handed me the perfect opportunity. Dad got diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. Suddenly the golden family image started cracking. Mom became overwhelmed. Ryan avoided helping. Medical bills piled up. And for the first time in history, I became useful. I handled doctor appointments remotely, helped organize finances, visited more often. My mother started praising me constantly. Daniel's always been the dependable one. Funny how fast roles change when the favorite son stops performing. Ryan hated it. You could see it all over his face during family dinners, especially when Dad started asking me for advice instead of him. One night after dinner, Ryan cornered me outside near the patio. You think you're some hero now? I shrugged. I'm helping. He stepped closer. You always do this fake humble act like you're morally superior. I laughed softly. You stole from me, Ryan. He rolled his eyes immediately. Oh my God, are you still obsessed with that? $400,000. You weren't entitled to shit. That word again, entitled, like fairness itself offended him. Then he leaned close enough for me to smell whiskey. You want to know the truth? I said nothing. Dad regretted you from the day you were born. That hit like a knife, and Ryan smiled because he saw it land. He told Mom you were weak, sensitive, not a real man. I should have walked away. Instead, I asked quietly, did he say he regretted me, or did you? Ryan's smile disappeared instantly. For half a second, I saw something underneath all the arrogance. Jealousy. Pure jealousy. Because despite everything, Grandpa loved me. Emily loved me. People trusted me naturally. Ryan had spent his entire life performing for affection. I suddenly realized something horrifying. My brother didn't just enjoy hurting me. He needed me beneath him psychologically. Without that, he had nothing. A week later, everything exploded. I got a call from my mother at 2 a.m., crying hysterically. Ryan's been arrested. Turns out federal investigators had been looking into mortgage fraud tied to one of his development projects. Not because of me. Because Ryan genuinely thought he was smarter than everyone. I drove to Ohio the next morning. The house was chaos. Mom sobbing. Dad shaking with stress. Ryan furious. And somehow, they still acted like he was the victim. He made mistakes, Mom cried. But he's a good person. Federal charges. Multiple counts. Potential prison time. And still, the family narrative remained intact. That's when Dad pulled me aside privately into the garage. The same place Ryan confessed years earlier. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him. I need your help. I almost laughed. With what? Ryan needs money for legal defense. There it was. Of course. Even now. Even after everything. Dad lowered his voice. You've done well for yourself. Better than we expected. Better than we expected. I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to pay for the lawyer of the man who stole my inheritance? Dad's face hardened instantly. This family survives together. No, I said quietly. Ryan survives. The rest of us sacrifice. Dad looked genuinely angry now. You have no idea what I sacrificed for this family. I froze. Something about the way he said it felt wrong. Not defensive. Fearful. Then he muttered something that changed everything again. If you knew the truth about your grandfather, you'd understand. My chest tightened. What truth? Dad immediately realized he'd said too much. Forget it. No. What truth? But he walked back into the house. And for the next 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about it, because suddenly, Grandpa's warning came rushing back into my head. Don't let your father screw you. Not Ryan. Your father. That distinction suddenly mattered. So while Ryan dealt with court hearings, I did something I should have done years earlier. I started investigating my grandfather's death itself. And what I found made me physically sick. I started with the hospice center. Not because I thought my family murdered my grandfather or anything insane like that. At least not yet. I just wanted answers. Why was Grandpa so afraid near the end? Why did Dad act nervous whenever he came up? Why did Grandpa specifically warn me? At first, the hospice records didn't reveal much. Old files, medication schedules, nurse notes. Then I found a nurse willing to talk unofficially. Her name was Carla. Retired now. Late 60s. Smoked cigarettes like she hated them. We met at a diner outside Columbus. The moment I mentioned my grandfather's name, her face changed. You're Harold Bennett's grandson? Yeah. She stirred her coffee slowly. He was terrified of your father. Every hair on my arm stood up. What do you mean? She hesitated. There were arguments, loud ones. Your father kept demanding paperwork. What paperwork? He never said exactly. Then she leaned closer. But your grandfather kept saying the same thing over and over. I swallowed hard. What? I won't let you ruin another son. I felt cold instantly. Another son. Not Ryan, not me. Another son. I stared at her. My father had a brother? Carla frowned. You didn't know? I genuinely couldn't speak. No. She looked horrified. Oh God. Turns out my father had an older brother named Michael. And according to the family story, Michael died at 19 in a drunk driving accident decades before I was born. Except, here's the interesting part. Nobody in my family ever talked about him. Not once. Not a single photograph displayed in the house. No stories during holidays. Nothing. Like he'd been erased completely. The second I got back to Chicago, I started digging. Death certificates, newspaper archives, old public records, and the deeper I dug, the weirder it became. Michael Bennett died in 1987 after driving off a bridge into the river outside town. Official ruling, drunk driving. But there were details buried in an old newspaper article that bothered me immediately. No alcohol was found in the car. The body was never recovered. And witnesses claimed Michael argued with my father hours before the crash. I remember sitting at my computer around 3 a.m., staring at the screen while my heart pounded. Then I found something else. Michael had been engaged, and his fiancée was still alive. Her name was Susan Keller. I almost didn't contact her because honestly, what was I even going to say? Hi, I'm the nephew of the dead guy nobody mentions? But curiosity won. When I called her, she went silent for nearly 10 full seconds after hearing my last name. Then she quietly said, "You sound just like Michael." That sentence hit me harder than expected. We met 2 days later. Susan was in her 70s now, but still sharp as hell. The kind of woman who watches everything carefully before speaking. She studied my face for a long time when I walked into her living room. Then she said, "Your father always hated anyone your grandfather loved." I sat down slowly. What happened to Michael? Her expression darkened immediately. Officially? He drove drunk. And unofficially? She looked me dead in the eyes. Your father killed him. The room went silent. I actually almost laughed because it sounded impossible. What? Susan stood up and walked toward an old bookshelf. From inside a faded storage box, she pulled out photographs. One showed my grandfather smiling beside a young man who looked disturbingly like me. Michael. Same eyes. Same awkward smile. Same skinny frame. It felt like looking at a ghost version of myself. Susan handed me another photo. My father and Michael together. And even in a still image, you could feel the tension. Your father was always jealous, Susan said quietly. Your grandfather planned to leave the business to Michael. Business, not inheritance. Business. My grandfather had owned a construction company before retiring, and suddenly everything started connecting. Susan continued carefully. Your father thought Michael was weak, soft, too emotional. She paused. Sound familiar? I felt sick. He used the exact same words about me. She nodded slowly like she expected that. Then she told me the part that changed everything forever. The night Michael disappeared, he had called Susan terrified. According to her, Michael discovered financial fraud inside the family business. My father had apparently been stealing money for years. Michael threatened to expose him. Hours later, he vanished. Officially, it became a drunk driving accident. Unofficially, Susan believed my father forced his car off the bridge. But there wasn't enough proof, she whispered. And your grandfather covered it up. I couldn't process that. Why would Grandpa protect him? Because losing one son was already destroying him. Losing another to prison would have finished him. That explained the guilt, the fear, the warning. Don't let your father screw you, because Grandpa already watched him destroy one son. I drove home in complete silence that night. Emily listened while I unloaded everything in our apartment kitchen. When I finished, she looked pale. Daniel, this isn't just family drama anymore. I know. You think your dad murdered his own brother? I stopped. I think my father destroys anyone who threatens the version of himself he wants the world to see. And suddenly my entire childhood made sense. Why Dad hated weakness. Why Ryan became the golden child. Why empathy was mocked constantly in our house. My father worshipped dominance. And Ryan learned it from him. Then everything got worse. Because 2 weeks later, my father called me drunk. That had never happened before. Ever. His voice sounded shaky. Did you talk to Susan? My blood froze. How do you know about Susan? Silence. Then, she needs to leave the past alone. I stood up from the couch slowly. What happened to Michael? Dad breathed heavily into the phone. You don't understand what he was doing to this family. What did you do? Then my father said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. He would have ruined all of us. Not, I didn't kill him. Not, you're crazy. Just, he would have ruined all of us. I whispered, what did you do? And my father started crying. Actual crying. The kind I'd never heard before. He wouldn't stop, he muttered. He kept pushing. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to record the call, but I was too stunned to think clearly. Then suddenly his tone changed completely, cold again. If you love your mother, You'll stop digging. Click. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone for maybe 20 minutes. Emily finally whispered, "What are you going to do?" And for the first time in my life, I was afraid of my father. Not emotionally, physically. Because suddenly I realized something horrifying. Ryan wasn't the real monster in my family. He was just the copy. My father was the original. And 3 days later, my mother called screaming because my father had disappeared. At first, everyone assumed my father had wandered off because of stress or early cognitive decline from the Parkinson's. But deep down, I knew better. My father didn't disappear. Men like him controlled situations. They didn't lose control. Unless something forced them to. I drove to Ohio immediately. The second I walked into my parents' house, the atmosphere felt wrong. Not grief. Panic. My mother looked exhausted, pacing between rooms while Ryan barked into his phone pretending to coordinate some massive search effort. The moment he saw me, his jaw tightened. "What the hell did you say to Dad?" There it was. Not, "Have you heard from him?" Not, "Are you okay?" Immediately blame. "I didn't do anything," I said. Ryan got close enough that I could smell stale whiskey and mint gum. "He calls you once, then disappears? That's not suspicious to you?" I stared at him carefully. "You tell me." For half a second, something flickered across his face. Fear. Real fear. And suddenly I understood. Ryan knew more than he was admitting. That night, police searched nearby highways and hospitals, while relatives flooded the house pretending to care. Everyone kept comforting my mother while subtly avoiding eye contact with me, like they sensed something rotten underneath the surface. Around midnight, Ryan cornered me alone in the kitchen. "You need to stop talking to people." "What people?" "Susan Keller." So he knew about her too. Interesting. I leaned against the counter calmly. "Why does that scare you?" Ryan laughed nervously. "You think you're uncovering some giant conspiracy? Dad and Michael fought. Big deal." "You said Michael was never talked about because it hurt Grandpa too much." Ryan froze. "Because he never told me that." I saw him realize it instantly. "You lied," I said quietly. Ryan looked away first. That told me everything. The next morning, police found my father's car abandoned near an old marina outside town. No sign of him. But they found something else. Blood. Not much, just enough to raise alarms. My mother completely broke down. Ryan immediately started controlling the narrative. He probably fell near the docks. Maybe someone robbed him. Dad's confused sometimes now. Everything sounded rehearsed. Meanwhile, I kept thinking about the phone call. If you love your mother, you'll stop digging. That wasn't fear. That was a threat. Then came the discovery that shattered the entire family. Police searched Dad's home office for clues. Inside a locked filing cabinet, they found stacks of financial records tied to Ryan's fraud investigation. Illegal transfers, hidden accounts, fake property valuations. Ryan went pale when detectives mentioned it. "This has nothing to do with Dad disappearing," he snapped. But investigators suddenly became very interested in our family, especially when they discovered large cash withdrawals made by my father days before vanishing. That afternoon, Detective Ramirez pulled me aside privately. "You and your father recently argued?" Of course, Ryan told them. I explained the inheritance situation carefully, leaving out Michael for the moment. Ramirez listened quietly. Then he asked, "Did your father seem afraid of anyone?" And immediately, one image flashed in my head. Ryan. Not because I thought Ryan killed him, but because for the first time ever, my father's perfect control over Ryan had started slipping. Ryan was facing federal prison, financial collapse, public humiliation, and desperate people do desperate things. That night, while my mother slept upstairs under heavy medication, I finally confronted Ryan directly. He was drunk in the garage, again. Every major disaster in our family somehow circled back to that garage. "You know what happened to Dad?" I said. Ryan laughed bitterly. "You always think you're smarter than everybody." "Did he threaten you?" That made him stop smiling. "Interesting." I stepped closer. "Dad kept records on you. Enough to bury you." Ryan slammed his glass down. "He ruined my life." I blinked. "What?" Ryan stood up so fast the chair tipped backward. "You think I wanted any of this?" His face was red now, veins bulging in his neck. He controlled everything, every dollar, every deal, every mistake. I just stared. Because suddenly Ryan didn't sound arrogant anymore. He sounded trapped. "He made me lie to Grandpa," Ryan muttered. The world seemed to tilt slightly. "What?" Ryan laughed shakily. "You think the inheritance was my idea? Dad spent years telling me what I deserved." I felt sick. "Ryan, He said Grandpa loved weak people, said kindness makes men failures. His eyes were glassy now, almost childlike, and for one horrifying moment I saw what our father had really done to both of us. I became the scapegoat, Ryan became the weapon, different forms of abuse, same poison. Then Ryan whispered, "I didn't kill him." I hadn't even accused him directly. That told me more than words ever could. What happened? Ryan rubbed his face hard. Dad came over 3 nights ago, drunk, rambling about Michael. Every nerve in my body tightened. What did he say? He thought you knew everything. My heartbeat started pounding. He kept saying he had no choice back then. Michael, Jesus Christ. Then Ryan looked directly at me. And then he said if prison ever came for him, he'd make sure none of us survived it. Silence. Cold silence. I whispered, "What does that mean?" Ryan shook his head slowly. "I don't know." But he did know, or at least suspected. Then he said the sentence that truly terrified me. He had a gun. I immediately stood up. "Where is it now?" Ryan looked away. "I don't know." That was a lie, and we both knew it. The next morning, police found my father, or technically, they found his body, floating near the marina. Official cause looked like suicide at first glance. Gunshot wound. My mother collapsed screaming when detectives told us. Ryan stared at the floor without reacting. And me? I felt absolutely nothing. No grief, no shock, just exhaustion. Because even dead, my father had left destruction everywhere behind him. But the real nightmare started during the funeral. That's when Detective Ramirez approached me quietly outside the church. "We need to talk." His tone instantly told me something was wrong. He led me toward an unmarked car away from the crowd. Then he handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small cassette tape, found in my father's coat pocket. My name was written on it. Daniel. My stomach dropped. Ramirez spoke carefully. "We haven't listened yet, since it was addressed personally." I stared at the tape. My father knew he was going to die. And somehow, that scared me more than if he'd been murdered. I waited until that night to play it. Just me and Emily sitting in our apartment living room. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the tape recorder. Then my father's voice filled the room. Old, tired, but calm. "Daniel, if you're hearing this, I'm dead." I felt Emily grab my hand. Then my father continued. "You were never supposed to find out about Michael." My entire body went numb. I told myself for years it was an accident, that I only scared him, that the bridge was wet. Emily covered her mouth. "I didn't mean for him to die." I stopped breathing. My father kept talking. And with every sentence, my childhood shattered further. He admitted confronting Michael near the bridge, admitted threatening him, admitted grabbing the steering wheel during the fight. Then came the worst part. "Your grandfather knew." I felt physically sick. "He helped cover it up because he couldn't lose another son." I stood up abruptly, pacing the room while my vision blurred. Generations. Generations of lies. Then my father's voice softened, and I became him. Him? Ryan is exactly what I turned into. Angry, hollow, cruel, and I made him that way. Emily was crying silently now, but I couldn't. I was too numb. Then came the final twist. The thing that truly destroyed me. "You always wondered why your mother treated you differently." I froze completely. No matter what happened, she could never fully look at you without seeing Michael. My heart stopped. "She never told you because I begged her not to." Emily slowly looked up at me, and then my father whispered the sentence that changed my identity forever. "Michael was your real father." Silence. Absolute silence. I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. The tape crackled softly. Then my father continued. "Your mother had an affair with him before the accident. When she got pregnant, Michael wanted to leave town with her. After he died, I married her anyway." I collapsed back into the couch. Every memory of my childhood suddenly rearranged itself into something horrifyingly logical. Why Dad hated me. Why Grandpa loved me differently. Why my mother looked guilty every time Dad insulted me. Why Ryan treated me less like a brother and more like a rival invading his territory. Because biologically, I wasn't his brother. I was his cousin. And my father spent 30 years punishing me for the existence of a dead man he killed. The tape ended with one final sentence. "I'm sorry I destroyed all of you." Click. Silence. Emily whispered, "Oh my God." But I just sat there staring ahead. Because suddenly I understood the real tragedy. My entire life, I thought I was fighting to earn love from the wrong family. But the truth was, I never actually belonged to them in the first place.